Okay, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. I'm Kate Hans, I'm the Vice President of Customer Experience at Tealbook, and it's my pleasure to be your host today. Joining us today is Jared McAdoo. He's the Senior Manager of Product Marketing at Ivalua. Jared has 25 years of procurement experience across multiple industries, including defense contracting, higher education, retail, manufacturing, and engineered products. Ivalua is the leading provider of cloud-based spend management solutions. Their complete unified platform empowers organizations to effectively manage all categories of spend and all suppliers, increasing profitability, lowering risk, and improving employee productivity. Trusted by hundreds of the world's most admired brands and public sector leaders, and recognized as the leader by Gartner and other analysts, Ivalua maintains the industry-leading 98% plus customer retention rate. That's very impressive, Jared. Welcome and great to have you with us today.
Thank you so much, Kate. I appreciate it.
Also joining us is Matt Palacteri, who we're lucky to have as the Chief Strategy and Revenue Officer here at Tealbook. Matt's a visionary leader that has helped shape Tealbook into the industry-leading supply intelligence solution that it is today. He has over 12 years deep experience in the enterprise technology space and was part of the management team who took over the acquisition of Vinemaya in 2015, and then worked as the Vice President of Business Development of Acquire. Over the course of his career, Matt has excelled in creating real-time procurement solutions, bringing the concept of price dispersion elimination to enterprise clients, and has set growth records in his role at Acquire, as well as in previous roles at NEP and CDC News. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Kate.
So just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. This recording will be available next week on our Tealbook YouTube channel, so please do keep an eye out for that. And it would be great if you could share this event on any social channel and tag us at Tealbook and at Ivalua. And if you have any questions at all during the presentation, please do type them into the question box on Zoom, and I'll bring them up during our Q&A section at the end. So let's jump right in and explore this really relevant topic. Matt, can you touch on why reshoring has become so important?
Yeah, thanks, Kate. So reshoring has been something that we have seen really come up a lot with our recent customers. And it really started with the Made in America executive order that Joe Biden put in earlier in the year. And frankly, I think a lot of this is in response to the pandemic last year. And I think in many ways we were actually fortunate that we had a bit of a test last year with things like the N95 mask. As many know, and I think everybody experienced at the beginning of the pandemic, we had outsourced the manufacturing from the United States of N95 masks to other parts of the world, and primarily China. And while that was a great method when it came to cutting costs in other procurement strategies, when it came to being agile and actually acquiring those goods during a time of need, it became much harder to do so. And we were really left vulnerable at the beginning of the pandemic. And we see similar trends happening across all sorts of goods and services right now. So we certainly saw that with something like an N95 mask at the beginning of the year. But then right now we see things like shortages in oil, right? There's a lot of reasons to why there's an oil shortage, but nonetheless, we do see climbing oil prices. We see other risks like over 50% of the world's semiconductors are produced in Taiwan. And so now we see things like chip shortages starting to come up. And when we go around the globe and you look at the changing political climate, as supply chain professionals, we need to be ready for whatever risks do come up so that we can be agile. And the way that the Americans have decided to address this is by trying to bring manufacturing back home.
Okay. Makes a ton of sense. So I know that earlier this year, we did this Wakefield Research survey. Would you like to touch a little bit on the key findings from that?
Yeah, I found this research to be really compelling because it's stating a lot of things that we already knew and the things that we experienced. But what was nice about this survey is that we ran the first version 1 week before the actual pandemic hit. And so you got a little bit of a pre-pandemic view into how supply chain professionals were already thinking about the data problem in the space. And then we reran this same study this year. So you get kind of a before and after look. And what I find really interesting looking at this is that in March 2020, 81% of the procurement leaders thought that they were not completely confident in their supplier data. And that shouldn't be surprising given the results. We found that a lot of supply chains were disrupted. The entire manufacturing plants were shut down. We saw supply shortages across the board because organizations were unable to be agile during those times. And then 82% of the procurement professionals discovered the hard way that they actually were correct in that their data was less than adequate during the pandemic. So in many ways, we saw ahead of time that this was a problem and should have been able to predict this and address it. We ignored it, and it led to a lot of the problems that we saw last year. And one of the really interesting things that then came from that is that then now 96% of the respondents in this year's study said that being agile is now more important than cost savings to the bottom line. And I think there's always been this theory in the space of is it more important to have strict cost control, or is it more important to remain agile? And at the end of the day, the incremental value that you can deliver to your organization through strict cost control gets wiped out instantly when direct materials and things feeding into your core business line get wiped out. And last year was the great example of that, right? We saw entire factories shut down, and therefore we couldn't produce the things that would actually keep our employees with their core job.
Yeah, and that ties into, I know that some of the findings as well were around kind of increased competitiveness and even the ability to expand and begin a supplier diversity program. Would you like to touch a little bit on those two as well?
Yeah, so well, if we start with diversity was another topic that was a really big topic last year. And to run an effective diversity program, it starts with having really great supplier data. You need to know which suppliers in your area have diversity certifications and what goods and services they actually can provide you. If you don't know those things, it becomes really difficult to orchestrate a diversity program, even if you have the best of intentions. And suppliers with diversity certificates are really great ones to bring in for competition to your core vendors anyway. A lot of times, especially your small businesses, you can see more innovation coming out of small businesses that can move a little bit faster. They can push your core suppliers, and in many ways, they'll drive better performance from the core suppliers, or you switch to the more innovative one.
Yeah, I agree. And in fact, it ties in nicely with that agility point, right? By working with more small and diverse vendors, you can often make your supply chain more agile as well. So if an organization wants to ensure a successful reshoring initiative so that they can actually tap into some of these benefits, where would they start, Matt? Or like what steps would they take?
Yeah, it all starts with supplier data. And so at the end of the day, we feel that if you have poor supplier data, whatever decisions you make off of that data, whatever systems you put that data into, you're not going to get the optimal result at the outset of it. And so by starting the process by understanding the total landscape of all of your suppliers, what the corporate initiatives are, what are you trying to achieve, then you can begin to bridge the problem. And right after that, you should start to evaluate your spend categories. You then will understand which suppliers you're doing business with, which ones you could be doing business with, in which categories is there more opportunity? Maybe which categories are you too multi-threaded? Where are you too single-threaded? And once you come up with all of that and you overlay it with a geographic reach, for example, then you can identify similar companies, similar suppliers in different areas of all sorts of different risk tolerances. And you can keep a pulse on the market so that whatever happens, should that be another risk that originates in Southeast Asia, or maybe it be another cyber attack in the United States, or any number of risky endeavors that can come and disrupt your supply chain, you have a plan where we're not forced to being so reactive. that you've planned this out, and then you can be agile in nature and keep really your organization afloat during the disruptive times.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, identifying new suppliers has always been a challenge that procurement professionals has faced. And I read an article the other day that according to McKinsey, I think they said it takes on average about 3 months to complete a single supplier search, equating to about 40 hours of work, with only then a handful of suppliers that they're left with that are potentially viable solutions. So, and when they do discover the right supplier, it takes time to effectively onboard them and integrate them. So, Jared, when it comes to understanding all of the possibilities involved with integrating new suppliers into your supply chain, what process should an organization consider when undergoing this transformation?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Kate. And what I'm going to try to do here is maybe bring sort of the academic to life as we discuss some of these. So, you and Matt brought up some great points, and Kate, I'm so glad that you brought up that McKinsey metric, because that has traditionally been in sourcing for those of us who've been in. That has been a real classic problem, is discovering suppliers. And to Matt's point on a lot of things, to be able to challenge ourselves in this day and age to make that classic problem more of a classic problem and less of a current problem, because we have solutions out there. We do need to understand that discovering suppliers, doing these items, they are a step in a complete journey on this. So I'm going to pivot a little bit based on the good foundation that Matt has set for us, and talk about how we take those first steps and we turn an opportunity like reshoring into something that can be sustainable, something that can be successful, and how you would take a solution, for example, an innovative solution like Tealbook for discovering suppliers, and be able to work that into a robust source to pay process to make these type of items possible, and again, ensure that they're successful and sustainable. So I'm going to try to set this landscape in terms of how we approach it from a solution provider, and how our integration from Tealbook works. So in order to set this landscape, I did want to note for those of you who maybe aren't aware that Tealbook and Ivalua maintain a standard integration between our two solutions. So we're able to bring in data from Tealbook, and we're able to integrate it throughout our various source to pay solutions. And I'll touch on the way we've designed this to enable this type of process. So if I look at this from how we did it, our integration enables our customers to use the Tealbook solution to support these type of discoveries. As Matt mentioned, the ability to gather data, whether it be spend data or whether it just be quality supplier data, and then use that metadata to actually curate a supplier discovery, to be able to look at a reshoring or a +1 strategy, if I'm going to go Asia +1, based on resilience, to be able to leverage the existing data to further cut down that multi-month process to I can curate who are the possible list of providers to do that. So being able to integrate that data, have access to that rich supplier data, have access to that spend data, and be able to leverage that data for the similar suppliers is how we look to integrate our solutions, and how we've integrated with Tealbook as well. Once we discover these suppliers and we're able to leverage that data, it really becomes a much more of a classic supplier management opportunity problem. Wherever you are in your life cycle, is how do we again take that step to bring those items in and be able to interconnect those, because the last thing you want, and as Kate mentioned, the speed you gain in supplier discovery can't be lost in supplier onboarding. You can't gain months only to fall back into a poor process where you're again collecting specific data that you need in order to onboard your supplier to get them activating it as well. So that becomes important to make sure that we have those innovative processes to go on here. So when we talk about this, we look at this from the standpoint of, we want to make sure that we're ensuring a successful transition. From what Matt discussed, is we curated the information, we looked across our suppliers, we identified opportunities, and we went out and identified potential suppliers. So we look at this as an opportunity that we now need to bring this information back into a process where we can collect all the important information and have a 360-degree view of supplier. Now, what does this mean? easily collect all the relevant information for the supplier. I have here in the first note, what I want to emphasize here is once we go out and we're able to use that metadata to discover those suppliers, and Matt mentioned some crucial data that we're looking at. You want to make sure that you have information on suppliers from a standpoint of geography, a standpoint of items like if you're looking at diversity, to be able to have diversity certifications, to making sure you're pulling the right supplier, to quality certifications, to all the information you need, not the least of which is contact information, to be able to gather that information as you would in a solution with like Tealbook, be able to seamlessly bring that over and collect that information and populate it into a system to facilitate that onboarding. Then this helps you create that single supplier record, which we can use to expose across all the procurement processes. As for example, you might want to discover a new supplier to run a sourcing event, or you might need to discover a new supplier because you have a resiliency issue where you have a risk or performance issue. So you might be bringing that information in different parts of the source to pay process. So you want to be able to make sure that you're integrating on across all those. And then you also need to have a solution that stays on top of supplier performance. So when we talk about reshoring, nearshoring, doing a +1 strategy, those type of items, it really boils down to once you've discovered the supplier is you're qualifying a new supplier. So you're going to have to do the things you need to do with a supplier to make sure that they're doing the right things, they're performing, they're executing. So being able to have access to all this information. So you need this information to be brought together. And just to go on my last point here is you turn that information, the disconnected information, into that consolidated data set that empowers your decision making all through the process. Whether it's part of sourcing, whether you're doing it downstream when you're doing the buying, you have all that information to be accessed, and you have that sync like we have with Tealbook that not only provides the data on a one-time, because again, this is a journey. It's not a one and done or a few steps and done. We sync that data up to make sure it stays current so we can continuously do these type of items.
And then how do you layer risk into that then, Jared?
Yeah, so risk is the ever important item that we're hearing nowadays. So, if we take a step back, at its core, what we're discussing here is identifying new suppliers and bringing new suppliers in. Now, what we've learned through the pandemic and what we've learned just in general is risk continues to grow. If this would be happening 3 weeks ago, I might be focusing more on supply chain risk and how it cascaded with COVID. But Matt mentioned when you get a cyber attack, now that's going to be fresh of mind as well. And if you've really embraced risk, or depending where you're at, or if you have a zero trust type risk mentality where you're assuming you're continuously always under attack, you're really looking to be able to monitor risk at the appropriate level, and you're looking to do it across multiple dimensions here. I just threw up on the screen, this is an example of, how some of our customers use our risk solution. They have multiple risk types here, and they have multiple subtypes within those that they're measuring. So depending on the criticality of the supplier, you need to be able to have that. And if you look at the zero trust type mentality, you need to be able to assess it and then continuously assess it for those items, and then also be able to manage and mitigate those risk issues, because nothing is a one and done for us anymore. Not enriching data, not risk, not managing performance as well. So being able to layer in and apply that multidimensional risk based on the supplier type is going to be critically important to the success as well.
Thanks for that overview, Jared. So assessing and monitoring, sorry, is there anything you wanted to cover off on this slide?
Yeah, and so everything I said here, and I want to take Matt's discussion even a step further. So we don't just discuss at the supplier level anymore, and it's it almost goes without saying, but it's worth saying that now we approach everything as a supply chain. I think as Matt mentioned, and he and I have had this discussion before, privately and publicly. When you had items come through like COVID, or you even discuss items now with like petroleum, it's really not only understanding what you're looking for, but the key products within the supply chain that get affected by this. What are the important parts of the N95 mask that I'm really looking for? Or petroleum, what does it affect beyond fuel and other products that may fit into my supply chain? So being able to not only discover new suppliers from onshoring, but also look at the critical sub-tier risk and the entire supply chain, because the opportunity for reshoring might not just be at the first level, it might be at every level, or nearshoring, or that +1. So being able to layer that in as well as you look across performance, syncing supplier data, and most importantly, risk as well, to being able to bring this in. And so that's how we approach, looking at these type of items in our partnership with Tealbook.
Fantastic. Yeah, assessing and monitoring risk is so important. It's such an important part of that process, right? When you're looking to reshore or nearshore to ensure that continued supply. Matt, would you like to wrap up for us before we take questions on why companies should be reshoring as a strategic move?
Yeah, it's something that we see most of our customers talking about, and it's something that we're going to see more and more pressure because of some of the geopolitical issues that are out there. And so what we're just seeing in general is that most of the forward-thinking supply chains are trying to get ahead of the next wave of risks that are out there. And it starts by understanding that vendor landscape and the types of companies that are moving back, at least in the initial analysis, looks like everybody with any sort of high-tech manufacturing, whether that be in the biopharma space or whether that be connected to any sort of computing, those things are really great candidates to bring back to the United States if they were initially put overseas. And they're also some of the really high impact and high risk types of items that it's that having them be manufactured outside the United States is a potential concern.
Yep.
And I think one thing to note here is, so we sort of, I sort of approach this from, looking at public sector opportunities, where you have stuff like the Buy America Act, where you're going to get an edict on, the amount of content you got to try from to Buy America. But also in the private sector, where I get really hopeful, and I think it builds on Matt's point, is we now have people who are going to be willing to invest because there's going to be government invested in those. So being able to catch that wave from the private sector as well, and get in with those companies who are going to be able to see the benefit of getting the government funding, and being able to upgrade their capabilities, their manufacturing capabilities, and be able to get in with that. I think it's really going to drive a number of items, and we see some really opportunities that you can see some sectors bounce back quickly because of the amount of investment that's going to be put into it.
Yep. It seems like a no-brainer to pursue this reshoring. But really, before we go into Q&A, I don't know, Matt, if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
No.
No. Okay, good. Really, as just as a thank you for those of you who have attended this webinar, we wanted to actually provide you with a special offer to show exactly how Tealbook and Ivalua can help you in the process of reshoring your suppliers. And really the offer is that if you send us 3 of your current offshore suppliers, we'll provide you with 3 viable domestic replacements for them. And our BDRs will be reaching out to you after this event in order to get that process going. And we look forward to helping your business with your reshoring efforts. So again, thank you for sending through your questions. Matt, we have one for you, and that is, can you touch more on the problems that reshoring solves for?
Yeah, so reshoring in general, the way we're seeing it right now is really a risk mitigation tactic. First and foremost, I think the reason we have the attention on it is because our supply chains were overwhelmed last year, and frankly, we didn't come through them in the way that we probably were capable of doing so. But it also can be a highly strategic thing when you take a step back and you start future planning, because it allows you to be more agile. And it allows you to bring more competition. And I fundamentally believe that when you add good, viable competition, it eventually brings cost savings in itself. So it's one of the reasons that we see it so often right now. I agree with Jared and what he said before. It's an exciting time because I think for the first time you see the support for bringing the manufacturing back home specifically, but we have really viable candidates here, and so it's just about knowing who can you shift that production to.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Jared, there's a question actually following on from that. Is this a solution a US-centric based option, or what if I need to +1 regional supply chain strategy?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. We started off with the context of the Buy America executive order, because it's sort of current. It's in the news. It's it's a sexy thing to talk about right now. But everything that we sort of talked about for the concepts here, um, for general supply chain resiliency, I think apply. If Matt and I were to have this discussion tomorrow, and the topic would be supply chain resiliency, I think Matt would probably say the same thing: is good supplier data, understand where your spending is, and then be able to look at similar suppliers, whether that means I need to move, I need to have a supplier in Asia and a supplier in EMEA. I think it's the same process, and the technology, that the way we look at it is again, with Tealbook discovering, it's a global discovery solution, and from the source to pay standpoint, we would apply a management and an onboarding process that would fit that region. There's some nuances when you get with risk, because you have some compliance. There generally are, but that's that's in the detail, and the devil can be in the details. But it really is a global process. Reshoring, nearshoring, an overall resilience strategy. There's a good basic framework in all of this that can be followed.
Yep. Agree. And actually, there's been a few questions coming through, Matt, on how, because this is so revolutionary, how does Tealbook actually ensure this up-to-date supplier information? So maybe if you can just touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, so our approach is different to gathering the data. So the reason we can keep it up to date more so than anybody else is that approach. We're leveraging state-of-the-art machine learning concepts to monitor changing information on the web. And so we first crawl every website in the world, and then we're actually working into subdomains too. So it's the deep monitoring and extracting of that information that then allows us to alert whoever is using Tealbook when that information is changed. And that's really the power of Tealbook, is you get the proactive alerting versus any other approach where you have either the suppliers maintain their data, or you outsource it to a low-cost country to then get the data right once. That data degrades over time. So when you have data that gets better over time because of monitoring it through machines, you can be a lot more agile in that approach.
Yep, that makes sense. I guess that ties in nicely with the question for you, Jared, is beyond discovering new suppliers and managing information, as you mentioned, how can Ivalua drive efficiency elsewhere?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I just happened to be talking to some of our sourcing team about the other day. Is we sort of look at the broader solution. I do a lot of this, our supplier management, solution work. So it's really about the information for me and being able to empower that information. But some interesting use cases you have for this, and Matt mentioned it when we talk about diversity. That's another big item that's important. It's important for a social responsibility program, but it's also important for nearshoring or reshoring, I'm sorry, in the US, because a diverse, smaller supplier will get even more consideration on a government contract than a local supplier who gets some consideration over a local or a foreign supplier. So that's really important. So having this quality information that we discuss when we bring it in, it enables other parts of the solution that we have, like looking at a sourcing optimization engine where we can set up rules to even deal with award scenarios when we want to make sure that we have the right set asides for diversity, or just that geographical information. If we have a multi-regional strategy, we can leverage our sourcing optimization to make sure that we're doing that type of those type of award recommendations where we can spread our risk out to do those type of items. And that's beyond some of the things I mentioned, like bringing in sources of risk data and always exposing that information, so we're making sourcing or buying decisions with the latest information. So the beauty of the landscape now is we really can gather this data, and if we curate it correctly, we can leverage it everywhere.
Absolutely, and it ties in beautifully with the trends that we're seeing around this need for agility and having up-to-date information, right?
Right.
Let me just see if there's any other questions. So just a reminder that we can help you reshore up to 3 suppliers, and you can reach out to us on our contact page, which is www.tealbook.com and then /contact. So just wanted to thank you everyone for attending today. We appreciate you joining the webinar, and we hope that you have some useful nuggets that you can take back to your business to begin developing those reshoring strategies. And thank you, Jared and Matt, so much for sharing your insights with us. Don't forget that this will be uploaded to the YouTube next week. And if you'd like to know more about your reshoring supply chain for a more agile, innovative, and balanced procurement process, Tealbook and Ivalua would like to encourage you to reach out to learn more. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Jared.
Bye.